Greetings, YouTube. I actually question whether I should have the bright shiny lights on in this video because this is not going to be a bright shiny video. So I picked up a game called Aether and Steamworks, and I honestly cannot tell you why. I mean, I literally don't have any idea why I did it. There was something about it in the write-up on Drive-Thru RPG that intrigued me, and kind of in the vague D20-ish field of play. I like steampunk kind of settings, uh, so I have something intrigued me. I don't know what it was, but so I picked it up, and eventually I got around to reading it. And I picked this up in September of 2022. I don't remember when I actually got around to reading it, but the setting is grimdark, almost cartoonishly grimdark. Like, it came across to me almost like something that was written by a 15-year-old, trying to show how serious and grim and gritty they could be. So the basic concept is that in this world, again, Steamworks, that gives you a hint that there's steampunky things going on. There is the Aether, which is the force that permeates the universe, that is the underlying structure of all things fantastical in the world. Okay. In some games call it mana. They call it Aether in this game. All right, that's fine. And the setting as presented is one of rebirth. Okay, so at one time the elves were in charge. They had a vast, expansive empire. They were iron-fisted fascist totalitarians. They essentially crushed any dissent, but for some strange reason decided to outsource their military operations to the dwarves. It's never smart to outsource your military operations, particularly when you're an iron-fisted authoritarian. Because eventually it's going to occur to the military that, we're the ones with the weapons. So they overthrow the elves, and they establish the new empire with the dwarves in charge and trying to, create a just, relatively balanced and equitable society, I guess. I say basically because we're going to get there. So I don't know how bad the elves got. It's implied that they got really bad. Okay, but the dwarves, they aren't the nicest folks either. Why do I say that? Well, you see, in this setting, it's illegal to be an elf. Flat out. You can play an elf. There are stats for an elf. But if you were discovered to be an elf within the empire that is currently under the control of the dwarves, you will at best be arrested and thrown in prison, quite possibly be executed, simply for being an elf. And that's deeply problematic. That is deeply bigoted. That's deeply speciesist, if you will. That's twisted. That is not something I think that the good guys should be involved in. That's the kind of thing like, that is the culture you're coming from. The best thing you could do is put together a party of robust adventurers and head in a direction that way and never come back. But then we have people that do spell casting. Okay. Now, the spell casting is looked down upon by the dwarven government. Now, realize that the force of magic permeates everything. It is the foundation for all things fantastical, as I said. So everything that in their society that isn't, steam-powered kind of thing is fueled by this stuff. But if you intentionally become a spellcaster, you are automatically on a watch list. You are automatically suspected of being this far away from, putting on the evil, Darth Vader helmet and trying to take over the world. It has gotten so bad that every single spellcaster has to report to a parole officer once a month, who then has to be proved. You then have to convince them that you are in fact not going to try to take over the world this month. Though how you prove a negative is a bit beyond me. I get the feeling that in a system like this, those with the money never get arrested, and those without the right kind of connections do get arrested. And they arrest enough people of the wrong type so that the people feel that they're being protected, even though those who are of the right type don't ever get arrested, and of course they're able to do what they want to. That's not explained explicitly in the setting, but I have a hard time not extrapolating that in a heartbeat because, well, that's how it always works when you have classism and you have power structures and you have those who get away with things and those that don't. That's just what it happens. It's not something I like, but it's just the reflection of the world and the existence as we know it. So that's a really, really grimdark setting. Okay? I can't stress this enough. It hit me like a sledgehammer. Then I get to looking at the mechanics themselves. Now, the idea of the mechanics are kind of old school in that small is better. Small numbers are better. So you have 4 levels of ancestry, which is your whatever your species is, and you can take abilities chosen from a pool. So you can't ever have all of your species abilities, but you'll be able to pick some of them over a 4 level span. You also can have 10 levels of class, and you can mix and match different classes. And you can only ever have a total of 14 levels. Again, small is better. That seems to be an OSR kind of mantra. And I found that strange. 14 was a strange number to me, but okay, that's what they want. They want a smaller is better. Okay. I'll freely admit I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of the mechanics because there's so many other things about this setting that just sets me off that if you want to read it, go ahead and read it. But this is the basic gist of what I'm talking about. This old school concept that smaller is better. So 14 is the maximum class level. Then we start getting into the way the game is presented. Now remember, as I've described it, grimdark, smaller is better, 14 levels, you know what I mean? The presentation is 180 degrees from that. Okay? Almost every page when it's talking about mechanics is broken into a grid of 4. So you get 4 quadrants. And in each quadrant is going to be a choice. So at first level of your ancestry, you get 1 of 4 choices. Second level, you get the point. And within each one, there's a description of what the ability is and the mechanics involved, some of which build upon other abilities you've purchased at an earlier date. Some are just completely independent of anything. And because they're limited to that quadrant, it means that the font size does this. Because if there's 40 words, that's one font size. But if there's 120 words, that's a much smaller font size because you're limited to the same space. Okay? And at the bottom of each one of these little quadrants is often some kind of a quote or a reference to something either in-game or out of game, most of them out of game references to our world, to references to movies and to books and to characters and from memes and things. So there's real world references baked into these rules. And the fonts used and the presentation used is incredibly cartoony. I mean, I looked at this and my first thought was this could be something that had been chosen for Steve Jackson's tune because the font and the grids are all teal. And the font for all the headings is this really goofy cartoon-like font where like letters are different sizes and like if you have 2 L's, the second L nests inside the first L. And it's just this incredibly light, goofy, jokey kind of visual presentation slapped on top of this incredibly grim, dark, Warhammer 40,000 K kind of a setting. And that it's whiplash for me. I'm reading this and like, who thought this was a great design choice? First of all, just have columns like other rules have. That way the font stays the same everywhere. Yes, it does mean that you're not going to be able to have a nice little grid for each level of your ancestry or each level of your class. I get that. It's not going to be nice. And Don't have your game full of jokey quips when it's a grim, dark setting. So I was getting so many mixed messages from this, and it just seems so stylistically weird as it's presented. And then we get to some of the classes. Now, you've got your, whole idea. You got like your classic spellcasters and thievy folks and things like that. But what got me was when I finally got to the battle scarred. And the battle scarred are this setting's fighters. Yes, again, can't call them warriors, can't call them soldiers. You have to have something edgy. It's got to be grimdark. So you call them battle scarred. Now, the battle scarred have the most problematic game mechanic for a class that I've seen in a very long time. And that is that every single battle scarred suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. 100% of the battle scarred suffer from PTSD. Now, as an aside, and this is only partially a reflection of my own ADHD, actual real-world data is that 30% of veterans suffer from PTSD. 40% of people who have survived adult domestic abuse have PTSD, and 50% of children that have survived domestic abuse have PTSD. So, on behalf of everyone who has PTSD in the real world, and I'm going out on a limb here, I admit this, but on behalf of all of us, screw you. Stop using my mental illness as a game mechanic. Not to mention, stop insulting the veterans of the world, where that you're presenting it that every single person that's ever served in some kind of a defensive or militaristic background suffers from PTSD. It's like, wrestling with some dark, brooding, anti-hero kind of background. Again, grimdark comes across as written by someone who's 15. And then there's a class ability you can pick up at a later date. I think it was the first level, was the higher level. That is essentially even greater emotional trauma, and it gives you a bonus to something. That's warped. And then you start looking at some of the traits you can pick up over time. And some of them are essentially, you're creating a negative and you're taking a flaw to get a bonus kind of thing. But one of the flaws that you're presented with, the option to take, reads as autism. Now, if a person who has PTSD wants to play a character that has PTSD, go for it. Same thing, if you have anxiety, you want to play somebody that has anxiety, fine. If you have autism and you want to play someone that has autism, I got no problem with that. But if you don't have PTSD, don't play someone that does. If you don't have anxiety, don't play someone that does. If you're a white guy, don't play a black guy. If you're a guy, don't play a woman. You see where I'm going with this? If you don't have that lived experience, there's going to be almost no way for you to play that class or that character trait without being really ugly stereotyping, without engaging in just horrendous levels of stereotyping, of just ugly tropes. There's no way around that because you don't have that lived experience. And very few of us have degrees in psychology or psychiatry or sociology or feminist studies or the Black experience. I mean, I could spend the rest of my life reading about the Black experience and I'm never going to know what it's like because I'm a really, really white guy. I'm never going to play a Black guy. I can't. And I'm going to do everything in my power not to even touch an NPC that's a Black guy without being very careful not to present them as stereotypes, ugly stereotypes, because that's pretty much the nature of stereotypes. So I was very much put off by this game. I can't tell you the merits of how it plays because there's so much about this game, this game and the setting it is that just completely turns me off. Now you're going to say, well, that's just your opinion. You're right. It is just my opinion. But the game rules do state that every single person that wants to play a soldier has PTSD. And that's not my opinion. And that's twisted. There's no denying that it's an incredibly grim, dark setting, and you can say, well, it's because they had a really good reason, yada, yada, okay. Then why do they choose this jokey font and this bright colors, teal lettering and grid color and everything? And why did they stick to this 4-panel structure if it made sometimes the font so darn small, even with my bifocals, it made it hard to read? There's a lot of design choices in this game that I disagree with. I was not happy with it. I own it. I'm going to keep it. I mean, it's a digital, property. It doesn't take really any space. And I guess I may reference it again if I want to give an example of like how not to do a game. Well, here you go. This is how not to do a game. If you're going to come out of the gate with a grimdark setting, then present it as a grimdark setting. And if you're going to come out of the gate with something that looks like it's Toon, make sure it has the tone of Toon. And don't bake mental illness into your class stat block. That's just a bit of free advice there, folks. So yeah, this is, in my book, a very poorly presented and written game. Not because of the rules, because again, they kind of glossed over in my brain what the rules were. I don't really care. So much of it else was just overwhelmed by the setting and the presentation and the very problematic use of mental illness as a game mechanic. So take it for what you will. Maybe there are folks out there that love Aether and Steamworks. I'm not sure. But I'm not one of them. And I'm very confused about why the design choices were made, because to my mind, this entire thing was written from an extreme position of privilege by someone that doesn't have PTSD, by someone that isn't autistic, from the position of someone that doesn't understand that presentation and tone should really align with each other. So, yeah, maybe it's the greatest thing in the world for you. It isn't for me. And I apologize, this is a little ranty, but it is what it is. So, take it with a grain of salt, I guess.